The living room fell silent, the kind of silence that happens when everything changes in a single sentence. My son chuckled, "You'll never be as good as my wife." I stood up and said, "Then tell her to come teach me herself." I wasn't angry, that's what surprised me most. I'd expected rage, that hot flush of defensive pride that fathers are supposed to feel when their competence gets questioned. But standing there in my living room, watching my 28-year-old son's smug expression crumble into confusion, I felt something different entirely. I felt clarity. Let me back up. My name is Brian, and this story isn't about winning an argument with my kid. It's about the moment I stopped trying to. For 43 years, I'd been chasing a very specific version of success. The kind that comes with metrics, the bigger house, the better job title, the children who respect you because you've proven your worth through visible accomplishments. I was good at it too. I built a career in commercial real estate that had given my family comfort, stability, and all the trappings of what I thought mattered. But comfort and connection aren't the same thing. My son Marcus, we call him Mark, had always been close to his mother. That was fine when he was a kid. As he grew into a teenager and then a man, I told myself it was natural. Boys grow up, they become independent, they build their own lives. They don't need their fathers the way they did at 6 or 7. That's what I believed anyway. It was easier than admitting that I'd never quite learned how to talk to him about anything that mattered. We had surface conversations. Sports, the weather, his job, we could do those fine, but anything deeper than that, I'd always found a reason to excuse myself, work call, something that needed fixing, the game coming on. I was a master of productive escape. Then Mark married Sophie. Sophie was everything I could have hoped for in a daughter-in-law, smart, kind, genuinely interested in our family. And crucially, she had skills. Real, practical skills that I'd somehow never developed. She could cook. I mean really cook, not just follow a recipe. She knew how to garden, how to repair things, how to create spaces that felt like home instead of just a place you slept. She was patient and creative and present in a way I'd never quite managed. And slowly, without me even realizing it was happening, she became the standard by which I was measured. It started small. "Sophie makes this casserole that's amazing," Mark would mention casually, or "Sophie fixed the kitchen cabinet hinge today, she's so handy." Nothing mean-spirited, just observations, but they landed like small cuts, each one reminding me of something I wasn't. I tried to prove myself. I bought expensive gifts. I offered to take them out to the nicest restaurants. I made sure they knew I was successful, that I could provide. But watching Mark's eyes when he talked about Sophie teaching him to make bread from scratch or helping their neighbor fix a fence that was different from anything my paycheck could buy. By the time that afternoon came, I'd been marinating in this feeling for about 2 years. We were sitting in my living room, my perfectly decorated, professionally maintained living room that looked like a magazine spread and felt like a hotel lobby. Mark had come by to help me figure out the smart home system I'd installed. He'd arrived with Sophie's instructions written on a note card. "Why didn't Sophie just come over?" I'd asked, trying to keep my voice light. "She's got book club," he said, "but she walked me through everything. It's pretty intuitive once you know what you're doing." That's when I said something stupid, something I immediately regretted, even as the words were leaving my mouth. "Of course she did. Sophie always knows what she's doing, doesn't she?" Mark looked at me, and I saw something shift in his face. Not anger, pity. "Yeah, Dad, she does," he said quietly. "She actually takes time to learn things, to be good at things that matter." That was the opening. I needed to twist the knife on myself. "Like what?" I pushed. "Cooking, gardening, those are hobbies, Mark, they're not." "Not what?" he interrupted. "Not important, not as important as making money." And there it was, the thing we'd never said out loud. "I've never said that," I started. "You don't have to," he said. "Your life says it for you. You work 70 hours a week. You've missed soccer games and school plays and just moments. Mom did all that. Mom was there. And now Sophie's the person who actually knows me, who actually invests in our life together. You just show up sometimes." I sat down. I felt the air leave my lungs. "That's not fair," I said weakly. It's not about fair, he said. His voice had softened. It's just how it is. Sophie's better at the stuff that actually matters, the stuff that builds a life instead of just paying for one. That's when I stood up. That's when I said, then tell her to come teach me herself. But here's where the story gets interesting, because I meant it. The next Saturday, Sophie came over. Just Sophie. Mark had given her the context, and she'd agreed to what I'd asked, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. Nobody wants to teach their father-in-law how to bake bread or whatever he was about to humiliate himself attempting. But I didn't ask about bread. I asked her to teach me how to listen. We sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd bought because it looked good, not because I'd ever actually sat at it with my family and talked about anything real, and I told her the truth. I've spent my whole life proving I was good enough, I said, good enough to provide, good enough to be successful, good enough to be noticed, but I never learned how to be good enough at the things that actually build a relationship, and I'm losing my son over it. Sophie didn't try to comfort me. That's what I appreciated about her. She just listened. He doesn't hate you, she said eventually. He's just disappointed. He wanted his dad to be interested in who he is, not just what he accomplishes. I am interested, I protested. Are you, she asked gently, because I've never heard you ask him about his dreams, his fears, what he thinks about things. You ask him about his job like you're making small talk at a networking event. The truth of it was blinding. Can you teach me? I asked. Not really, she said, but I can tell you what I do. I ask questions, and then I actually listen to the answer instead of planning what I'm going to say next. I remember things he's told me, and I bring them up later. I admit when I don't know something. I'm not afraid to be weak or confused or to mess up. That sounds terrifying, I said. Sophie smiled. It is. That's why most people don't do it. So I started to change, not dramatically, not perfectly, but genuinely. I called Mark the next day and asked him about a project he'd mentioned weeks ago, something about renovating their basement. Instead of offering to write a check, I asked questions. Real questions. What did he envision? What was he worried about? How was he feeling about taking it on? For the first time in years, my son actually talked to me, not at me, to me. It took months before he completely softened, before he stopped bracing himself for judgment or criticism or the inevitable pivot to something I'd accomplished. But slowly, he began to trust that when he spent time with me, I was actually present. I started learning to cook, not because I thought it would impress anyone, but because I wanted to share something with my family that wasn't about money or status. I failed a lot. I burned things. I followed recipes wrong. Mark and I laughed about it together, really laughed, not the polite chuckles we used to share. I stepped back from work, genuinely stepped back, not the performative version where you talk about work-life balance while answering emails under the table. I reduced my hours. I made less money. My house is smaller now, and I care about it less than I care about having Sunday dinners where we actually sit and talk. Sophie and I became real friends, not the obligatory kind where you're pleasant at family gatherings. She taught me to make her grandmother's recipe for dumplings, and I actually sat in her kitchen and paid attention and asked questions when I didn't understand something. We cooked together multiple times. Mark and I started a project, not a home improvement project, something better. We started writing letters to each other. Once a month, we'd write about whatever was on our minds and exchange them. Some were serious, some were funny. All of them were honest in a way we'd never managed to be just talking. The night Mark said I was never as good as his wife, he was right. I'm still not as good as Sophie at the things she does. But that's not the point anymore. The point is that I stopped measuring myself against her. I stopped measuring myself against anyone. I started measuring myself against who I was the day before and whether I was showing up more honestly, more present, more willing to be weak and uncertain and open. I'm not the most successful version of myself anymore by the old metrics, but I'm infinitely more successful at the only thing that's ever actually mattered, being someone my son wants to spend time with, being someone worth knowing. That Saturday when Sophie came to teach me, she wasn't really teaching me to be better. She was helping me understand that better doesn't mean bigger or more accomplished. Better means showing up for the people you love, even when, especially when, you don't know how. When Mark finally asked me about it months later, I told him the truth. I'm still not as good as Sophie, I said, but I'm finally as good as I could be for you, and that's everything. He hugged me, really hugged me, like he meant it. That was worth more than every deal I ever closed.